Welcome to the session. My name is Jamie Cawley, and today we're going to be covering the SAP Cloud Platform Extension Factory, Kyma Runtime. So I'm going to begin the session with a few slides just to set the stage and provide a little bit of context. And then I'm going to move into showing you how to provision a Kyma runtime. And then I'll go into the runtime itself and do a little walkthrough and show you a couple of little demo scenarios. So the Kyma runtime and the central management plane were released on May 12th. And what the central management plane portion of that does is that's the piece where you can connect the different applications. So you can see on the left-hand side of the slide all the different applications you can connect. And this is not limited to just SAP systems, but we also have the intention to provide connectivity into third-party solutions as well. So you can see the different systems here on the left-hand side. I'm going to kind of focus on the SAP C4HANA system. So I do have one system that I'm going to use for my demo scenario, which is a commerce solution. The whole pairing process, really what takes place is the systems connect to each other, and then the system in question that's connecting is going to publish its information about APIs and events into the central management plane. And then any of the runtime, so in our case, the Kyma runtime, the central management plane will then publish that information into the Kyma runtime. So you can see with this, the central management plane is really just a service. So in our case, we're going to be using the SAP Cloud Platform cockpit, but it could serve other cockpits as well. And it will also serve other runtimes. So you can see the different runtimes, the serverless runtime, the application runtime, or the ABAP runtime. So it can all serve them as well. And of course, you have the different options for what kind of infrastructure that you want to run this on. So taking a look at the Kyma open source project versus what the SAP Cloud Platform extension Kyma runtime provides you. So there's a few different points here that you can take a look at, but probably one of the big factors here of difference is that the open source version you can install a whole bunch of different capabilities on it, including things, tools to help you do tracing and troubleshooting and that kind of stuff. On the Cloud Platform version of that, some of these were removed just to lessen the cost and to streamline the install of it a little bit easier. And in the future, you should have the option to then have a configuration option, which will allow you to choose these different tools to add them into your runtime if you desire that. So on the open source version, you have full access to the whole cluster, the whole Kyma cluster itself. And on the Cloud Platform extension factory version of that, it is limited that you do not have access into many of the system namespaces. And these include there's a few different Kyma specific namespaces, and there's a namespace for Knative and for Istio and such. So you will not have access into any of them. You only access into your own namespaces. If we look at infrastructure, we're starting off with just Microsoft Azure, and we will have other ones to follow. And of course, on the open source version, you have a whole host of different ways that you can install it. It comes with support. You're buying this through SAP, so you're going to get the SAP Enterprise support. And of course, anything that you build is your own responsibility. And it's based off of the SAP Cloud Platform Enterprise Agreement. So you're basically buying a subscription to it. So you buy a bunch of cloud credits, and then they're utilized for your runtime to pay for it. Okay, so let's look at what's inside a Kyma runtime. So, so we're going to break down a couple of the major pieces here. So the first is the service mesh. So this is Istio is the open source project that provides these many of these capabilities of the service mesh to us. So probably one of the main features of Istio is it provides a proxy among services and pods. And that is the reason being is it is what allows us to secure the communication between all the different services and pods of the cluster. And you also have features that allow you to manage the traffic of pods, so you can kind of control where traffic is going by different rules that you can put in place. And these rules could be based on different load balancing scenarios. You could do weight-based scenarios. You can use headers to kind of direct traffic. So you have various options with that. The next feature is the serverless engine. So this is using Knative, which is another open source project. And with this, the serverless of Kyma is based on Node.js, so you can use Node.js code to write serverless functions. And I'm going to cover many of these, many scenarios with that when we get into the demo. The next being the event bus, and this is using the Azure Event Hubs. So this is what allows you to subscribe to cloud events or business events and have them trigger a function or a microservice to then do something based on whatever that event data was. Next, we have the API gateway, and this is what allows you to expose APIs to the internet. And we have different ways of securing them. So I'm going to show you that as well in the demo. And next we have the service catalog. And this is where you can consume services from SAP. So Cloud Platform services, you can consume services from all the different cloud providers such as Google or Microsoft or AWS. And you can also make use of, this is where you make use of APIs or events that are provided from the different systems that you connect into your Kyma runtime. And of course, you get the secure SAP application connectivity. And as I mentioned, this is fully built on an open source, on many open source projects, and the Kyma project itself is open source. So let me, I'm going to switch to my browser here. So let me pull this over and I'll make this full screen. So here you can see that I have, this is just a global account view. So you can see, some different aspects of that. So to provision a Kyma cluster, what you want to do is come into your sub accounts, and you would choose a new, create a new sub account. So you can I'll just call this demo 1. Provider, you're going to make sure that you choose Azure, and you choose a region, and then you click create. And this will take a minute to create. You see the status change. And now it is ready. So I'm going to open up this new sub account I created. And you can see here, I just have this option to enable Kyma. So I'm going to click on that, provide a name. You see the provider is Azure. And then I have the different regions I can then provision my Kyma cluster into. So I just choose one and I would click create. And that would kick off that whole process of creating the cluster. So that's the process includes creating a Kubernetes cluster and then installing Kyma on top of it. So I'm not going to do that here. It's just going to take, it does take some time for that to be finished. So I already have, I'm going to just delete this and I'm going to move to a cluster that I already have set up. So let me open this cluster. So you can see here when it is done, you'll just get a link to your Kyma dashboard. But before you access it, the first thing you need to do is go into role collections. And you're going to set up a new role collection here. So you just click new role collection, provide a name. And you can see here I have this Kyma one set up. And you just basically add these two roles into your role collection by choosing the Add Role button and finding them. And then that portion would be done. And next you would come into trust configuration, choose your ID service, and then you would search for your email address that you want to provide access to. And you can see here, I have that Kyma role assigned to me. So you would, for your user, you would do that, and you would find the role by choosing that assigned role collection and assigning it to your user. And at that point, you'll be able to access and open and access the Kyma console. So the next thing you could also do is you have entitlements. So if you choose entitlements, and you can see I have one entitlement already set up for this alert notification. If you wanted to add any, you would choose configure and add service plan. And you could choose one of these. I'll just choose this application logging, add one service plan. And this will make it then available into your Kyma runtime, which you can then use it for your scenario. The next thing that we could take a look at is if I come back to my global account, I have my systems or my system landscape, and under that I have systems and formations. So this is where you can connect your various systems to your runtime. So you'd start off by creating a new system. So I'll just name it demo. And then choose the type. I'll just use Commerce Cloud for that. And choose register. And you can see here I get a token URL. So basically what I would do is then go back on my Commerce Cloud system, and there's a process for registering this. So I would all I need is this URL. So to get an idea of what's in this, it just returns you a JSON. And basically during this pairing process, what happens is there's this certificate information here. So the system in question trying to connect would use this certificate information to generate a certificate signing request, and then send it back to this URL. And there would be an exchange where using that request, it would then receive a client certificate, which these two systems can then communicate with. And at that point, then the system in question would publish its APIs and if it has any event data. And then that would make it available via the central management plane to any runtime that wants to subscribe to this. And this is a one-time use URL. So then if I try to refresh this, it's going to get an error. So it's no longer valid. So after you set that system up, you would then come into formations. You create a new formation, and you would select your system. I'm just going to select a random one, or I'm sorry, you select your sub account, and then select the system, and you create a formation. So this is what completes that process to then make it available into that runtime. So I'm going to go back to my sub account. So I do have one system. I guess I should share that real quick. I do have one system. So I have this SAP Inside Track. So I have this Commerce D29 system assigned to my sub account for my 808/608 sub account. So that's what's going to make it available into my Kyma runtime that I'm using during this demo. So let me open up my sub account, and then I'm going to open up my Kyma runtime. So let me sign into this. Oh. Okay, type my password right. One of these times I'll get it right. Okay, so when you log in, the first thing you're going to see is your namespaces. If this is a cluster that you have never used before, all you're going to see is a default namespace. You can see here that I've created 2 other namespaces. So now I'm going to just walk through some of the different features in this admin screen of Kyma. So I just was showing you how you connect a system here. So you see I have this the Commerce 29 system. I also just assigned this other system to my runtime, but I never, there's nothing really there because I didn't really connect it to anything. But if I come into the Commerce system, you can see here, I already have this bound to 2 different namespaces. You can also see the different services and events that the system provides. So I'll come back to this in a moment. The next thing here is you have the kube config. So this is what allows you to use, if you wanted to use the command line tools of Kubernetes, which is called kubectl or kubectl. So you can download the kube config, and then let me get out of full screen here. I'll just make this a little bigger. So what you would do with the kube config is you just set this. I already have it downloaded, so let me find that real quick. So I could just drag this over, and then I could set. So I set this property, and that I now have this configured to use through my command line tools. So I can type kubectl config get context, and I can see that I'm connected to this system. And so I'll come back to this in a second. And the next thing you have is the log. So you have a log viewer. In Kubernetes, everything is using labels to kind of organize the logs. So you have different ways of looking at this. So you could look at the whole namespace if you want it. You could look at, if you build in any serverless functions, they're labeled that way as well. And you can create these labels yourself as you're deploying any type of resource into your cluster, just to give you some way of looking at it. So now if I go back to namespaces, so I have an option to add a namespace here. And if I wanted to, I could also create a namespace command line. So I'll just call this one SAP IT for SAP Inside Track. So if I move this down a little bit and apply it, you can see here that it shows up right away. So this admin screen is using WebSockets. So now if I come into my namespace, you can see all the different options within your namespace. So one of the features that I was showing in as the bullet points of the PowerPoint was the service catalog. So we have under service management, you have a catalog, and you can see here that I added the alert notifications, show that so that was an entitlement from the cloud platform, and also have these different service brokers. So this is what gives me access into different features of the different cloud providers. So if I choose on the Azure one, I can see the different steps of how to set this up. So there's a process involving that. And then you can also see at the bottom here the different services that are available to you through that service broker. And so you could configure one for each provider if you want it, or just maybe just use one of them. So let me back up for a second here and go back to my applications. And for my commerce one, I'm going to bind that to this SAP IT namespace. And then I'm going to come back into that namespace and show you what happens there. So you can see here now I have this commerce D2029 system here. If I choose that, I can see all the different service class plans that are available to me. So in this scenario, I'm going to use some events. So you can see when I open this up, you can see you also have a little example structure or example payload of what each of these events would expose to you if you were subscribing to them. So I'm going to add an instance of that. So that will provision. And I'm also going to add this commerce web service. So the same thing is true here, that if I choose one of these, I can see the parameters that are available for this call, and then some different responses. I'm showing in XML. I can look at JSON. So I'm going to add one of these. So the next thing I'm going to jump down to is functions. I'm going to create a function here. So what I'm going to do is just use it in an order event. So I'm going to create that. So the way I subscribe to an event is I come into configuration and I have event triggers. I'm going to choose the add event trigger, and you can see these are all the different events. And I can use the search box, the search feature to narrow down what I want. So I'm going to search for order and click the order created one to add that. And all I'm going to do in this scenario is just output the data that I received from the event into the logs. So I'm going to save that. That's going to start deploying. And I have a log viewer right down here. So that will start showing some of the different stuff going on. So I'm going to actually switch to this commerce system. And I'm just going to put an order through. So I'm going to add something to a cart. And then I'm going to check out and log in and place my order. Okay, so you can see here what the data that I got back from that order being created. So I just get the base site, which is electronics, and the order code. Okay, so next, what I'm going to do is set up another function. So I'm going to click create function. And what I'm going to do is get the order details of that order. So I already have some code prepared. So let me just copy that in. So give me one moment here. And what I'm going to do is I'll set this up, and then while it's building, I'll explain to you what it actually does. So I need an environment variable. And that's just going to be set to electronics. And then I also need to bind this to my service instance. So I have create it. Copy this URL. I'm going to place it right here. And as I mentioned, this is Node.js, so I have the option to add dependencies into it. So this is like your packaged JSON. So what I'm going to do is just add one dependencies to Axios. And I'm going to save this. And so let's kind of review what I just did. So looking at my code, so what I do is I create a reference to Axios, which I added as a dependency, and also I create a reference to the gateway URL, which is the URL that provides me access to the API based off of that service instance that I created. And really what happens in this function, I'm just looking on the request query for a property called order number. And if I find that order number, what I'm going to do is call this function get order details, which basically what that does is just sends in a get request to my commerce system based off the URL that I build. So, one of the steps is I put this environment variable for site. So you can see here, I'm using that environment variable here. And so I build this entire URL and just send in a get request to my commerce solution. And then I get the response data back, which I'm going to return back to return back to whatever called this this function. So I still do need to create an API, which I'll show you that in a second. And so that the big thing to notice here is that I'm calling this URL directly right here, and I don't have to worry about how I authenticate. So when a system connects via the management plane, it's during that process it shares all the information about how that system is requiring authentication. So so that happens during the registration process, and that information is then shared with Kyma. So Kyma and the management plane manage that authentication portion of the call for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So if the system is using OAuth, the management of like the tokens and all that will be handled for you. So it just makes it very easy for you to call your connected systems. So you can, as I said, you just call them directly with the URL, and you don't have to worry about managing any of the authentication aspects of that call. And I guess the only other thing here to note is if I don't get an order number, I'm just going to return a message that says that that wasn't received. So now to actually utilize this, I have to create an API rule. So it can come into the API rules, click add API rule, and I'll just call this order details, and I'll use that for the host name. So the big thing here is I just choose what service I want to expose. And you can see I have different access strategies. You can do different authentication methods, and you can limit access via HTTP method. So I'm going to just leave it this way for right now and create that. And now I see the link to my API call. So if I come and click on that, you're going to see that message that no order num was received. So this was the order that I placed in here. So basically all I have to do is just click order num, and I'm just going to put this one in there. I call it, and you can see here that I get all the details regarding that order. So basically this is just calling back to the commerce system and providing me the response of the order details API call. So next, since I didn't provide any authentication method here, so I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to change it to OAuth. And I'm going to put to scopes. Let's put read and write as an example. And I'll click save. So now this is going to require that a token be sent to it during the call. So if I refresh this, I'm going to get an error that wasn't authorized. So let me switch over to IBS Code real quick. So you can see here, I have a YAML defined with a secret, and it just has two parameters, a client ID and a client secret. And these are base 64 encoded values. So these are the values that are not base 64 encoded. And then I'm going to add a OAuth2 client with the same name that's going to reference the secret that I'm creating. So what I'm actually doing here is adding a client into my Kyma system that I can use then to authenticate for this API. So I could either apply this, I have my kubeconfig set up, so I could apply it using the kubectl commands to apply a resource here, or I could actually just, in the Kyma console, I can come back to overview, and I have an option here to deploy a resource. So I'll do that, upload that. So now I have that deployed, so it's going to create, you can see here I have the secret that it just set up. I can look at the details here. So these are, once again, these are the base 64 encoded values. So now to call this, I'm going to switch over to Postman. And so inside of your Kyma cluster, you have an OAuth provider. So you can see here, I have a URL that I can call to get a token. I already have this configured, so I'm going to just call and send that request, and I get a token. I'm going to copy that token. So I basically just configure that with the client ID and the client secret that I just created. And the only other thing you have to do is on the body, you just put the grant type that you want to use, which is client credentials, and the scope. So I put the same scopes, the read and the write, made that call. You can see that I get them back here too. So now if I test this right now, I don't have a valid token. So I'm just going to get a 401 unauthorized. So now if I put that token that was just generated, you can then see that I got my my order details. So that concludes what I'm going to show today, and I appreciate you taking the time to check this out, and I hope you find the features of Kyma useful. And if you do have any questions, there's various channels that you can use to be helped out. Of course, if you're using the SAP provided Kyma Runtime, you have the support channels. You can refer to the open source site for the Kyma project at kyma-project.io, where you will find a bunch of documentation as well as tutorials. You can find a bunch of information at the help.sap.com in regards to how you set up the provisioning. You can find a bunch of answers and blogs on the SAP community. And you can contact me via Twitter, LinkedIn, and I've also included my email address. Thank you.